So welcome to Simply Reports and Pivot Tables. My name is Sarah Dixon. I'm a Client Services Librarian here at Yellowhead Regional Library. Today we will be looking at Simply Reports. Simply Reports makes it easy to create reports in your Polaris ILS. You can create, manage, and produce nearly 150,000 different types of reports. So previously we went over an introduction to Simply Reports as well as useful Simply Reports to run in your library. Today we will be focusing on using Simply Reports with Excel pivot tables. And so a pivot table is a data summarization tool found in Excel. In this webinar, we will be using pivot tables to extrapolate data about your collection from reports we will build in Simply Reports. All of the reports we will be building today are available on our Simply Reports depository document. So to access the depository document, you can go to Toolkit, Polaris Resources and Training, and then you would choose Simply Reports, and then you can click on the depository document. And all of the ones that we will be talking about today are under item list reports, and in brackets beside the report they will say useful with pivot tables in Excel. So for the session today we will be going very quickly through Simply Reports to build these reports. We'll be spending more time in Excel, so if you want to do this afterwards, which I definitely recommend, try building them and playing with the pivot tables. If you just want to write down the name of the type of report we will be building, and then you can just build it for yourself afterwards, and you don't have to write down all of the criteria. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat window at any time, and this webinar will be recorded and available on our website under Toolkit Recorded Webinars, and the previous two webinars are on our website right now. And there will be an evaluation at the end of the webinar if you could please fill that out. So let's get started. First, we'll show you one of the reports we'll be working on today. So this is an example of a pivot table. So this particular pivot table is showing a nonfiction collection at a library, and it has it broken down by Dewey range and by pub year. And then the data that's actually showing is the number of circs based on Dewey range as well as the pub year, and the number of items you have in your nonfiction collection based on Dewey range and pub year. So this is just an example of something you can build in a pivot table, and here's the pivot table on the side, like how you're actually choosing the pivot table and what you're going to see. And now we'll actually get started, and we're going to create this pivot table first. So first we're going to log into Simply Reports. So we would click on the link to Simply Reports and log in. And your login is the same as Polaris. And we'll hit login. Okay, and we're going to be building an item list report. So this report is called Nonfiction Items Broken Down by Dewey and Pub Year, and that's what it will be called in the Simply Reports depository if you want to write it down. So Nonfiction Items Broken Down by Dewey and Pub Year. So I'm going to go quickly through what we're choosing. So we're going to choose the classification number, and we're choosing the classification number instead of the call number because we just want to see the Dewey number. The call number will also have a prefix and the cutter, so the first three letters of the last name. The classification number is just the Dewey number, which is nice for organization in Excel. Next, we'll choose the mark pub year. Item lifetime cert count, previous year cert count, and item year-to-date cert count. And these will be all of our options in Excel in the pivot table. So these will be the different choices we have for if it's going to be in a row, in a column, or a value. And we don't need to select for sort because we're just going to be moving this into Excel and extrapolating data that way, so it will be sorting it for you in the pivot table. Now we just need to add a few filters, so I'm going to choose a library. And in this case, it needs to be a nonfiction collection. So you could be juvenile nonfiction, nonfiction, audiobooks that are nonfiction, depending on what collections you use in your library. And then it's also really important to make sure you choose record status of final so you're not looking at deleted items. And then this is just going to run the report for all of your nonfiction items. So in this case, this particular library has 1,748 items in nonfiction, and we're going to download the report and hit download. And I'll just open up Excel. I get a pop-up, and now we have the report. So this is just showing you the report. It's just all of the data. So we need to actually move it into a pivot table. So to do this, you just need to click somewhere in the data and hit Control A, and it's going to highlight all of the data for you. And then you're going to choose Insert and Pivot Table. And this pop-up will come up saying we're creating a pivot table, and because we hit Control A, it's highlighting all of the data that's entered and nothing else, so we're happy with the text range. If you wanted, you could actually get data from external data source, but in this case we don't have to with SimplyReports. And we want it on a new worksheet, not on the existing worksheet. So really you don't have to press anything if you hit Control A, you're just going to hit OK. And so now we have a new sheet. So this was the original sheet, and sheet 1 is where the pivot table is. And so this is showing you that there's a pivot table, and we now have this new area on the side. So all of the fields showing are all of the fields or all of the columns we had chosen in SimplyReports. So if we go back to SimplyReports, you can see that these were the columns we chose, and now they're coming up in the pivot table as fields. And so we need to choose where the fields will go by check marking them off and choosing if we want them to be a row, a column, or a value. So depending on which version of Excel, it might look slightly different. This is Excel 2010. Things might be slightly different, but they'll still have the same name. So these will still be called fields. You'll still have the column, the row, and the values. It just might look slightly different. So what we're going to do first is we're going to move the classification number to row. So I check marked it and it went to row, but if I wanted it somewhere else, you just drag it to where you want it. But we want it in rows. And what we're going to do is we actually want to group numbers together, because right now it's broken down by each specific item, and we want it to have it grouped by Dewey range. So to do this, what you're going to do is you're going to click on the first item that you want in the group, and then scroll down until you find the last item, and you're going to hold Shift and highlight them all. And then under Options, you're going to choose Group Selection, and you're going to give it a name. So we're going to call it 0 to 99 for the Dewey range. And I just clicked out of the pivot table, and if you click out, it disappears on the side. You just have to click back into the pivot table and you get all of the pivot table information. So now I can actually hit minus, so I don't see all of the specific items. So you might have noticed now that all of the items have a bolded item and a not bolded item. And if you look over at the field list, we have classification number and classification number 2. So classification number 2 is the grouping version, and classification number is all of the specific classification numbers. So you will just continue doing this. You just can highlight the ones you want, and I'll just do this one more time. So I'm just going to scroll down and then hit Shift to up to 178, because those are the 100s. And then again, we're going to hit Group Selection, and then we call it 100 to 199. And then again, we would hit the minus sign so that it's grouped together, so we're not seeing the specific items. So you would keep doing that until it's all organized in all the Dewey ranges that you want. And then what we would do is we were actually going to do this for pub year as well. And pub year, I check marked it and it went to row, and I'm going to move it over to column. And then I would also group. So I would do the exact same thing I did before. So I would click on the first item and then choose how high up we want to go. So let's say we want to go, there's going to be very few numbers from 1930 to 1979. So I'm grouping a larger amount together. I'm going to hit group selection, and then again, you're just going to give it a range. So you're just going to say this is 1931 to 1979. And then we would hit minus, and then we would just continue. So I've completed this in another spreadsheet just so you can see. So I've grouped all of the selections. So now if we look over here, we can see classification number and classification number 2 are under row labels, and under column we have pub year and pub year 2. So pub year is all the specific pub years, and pub year 2 is the ranges. So we don't need to see the specific number, so I'm going to uncheck pub year. And we don't need to see the specific classification numbers. We only care about classification number 2, which is the groups we had created. And so it unbolds it, and it just it cleans it up nicely. So we're just going to do a couple more things before we actually choose what data we want to see in the main part. So right now you can see that we have all of our nice groupings, but then we have a few random items that weren't cataloged correctly. And it's a very few items, so we just don't want to see them so that it looks a bit cleaner. So to do that, you're just going to check, you're just going to tap on that drop down, and you're going to see all of the different options that we have. So we see all the groupings that we created, and we can also see those individual numbers. So we're just going to uncheck all of those items. And so now it's going to look a lot cleaner, and you can do the same for the columns. So row label you can choose, and then column label you can choose. So we're just going to get rid of blank, and we're going to get rid of 1950 to 79 since there's very few items in that range, and it just looks a little bit cleaner. Okay, so we have our rows and we have our columns, but now we need to add the information that we want to see in our values. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the item lifetime circ count. So I'm going to check mark it, and it moved it right to values, and it chose sum. You have a choice with values to do different things between sum, count, average, max, min, and so on. So if you want to change that, you would just click on it and then choose value field settings, and you can choose sum, count, average, and so on. You can also change the name. So this is the wording that came from SimplyReports, but we want to make it look nicer. So we're just going to say number of circs. And then it's going to show that the values are up here, which is number of circs. And the number of circs are broken down by the Dewey number and by the pub year. So we can also add how many items so that we know how many items to compare to the circ. So we know, again, it's giving us more information for helping us decide where to spend our money, what's really popular in our library. And you can even get more specific, especially like the 600s and the 900s. You could break it down even further if you want to look at a specific Dewey range to kind of see which type of cookbooks are more popular than others. You can get very specific by choosing a Dewey range first in SimplyReports. So you can do that under item call number filters. You could choose a classification number so you're only looking at specific, like in the 600s, for example, or the 641s. And this way, you can actually break it down by different types of cookbooks or different types of history books and so on. So you can get very specific. I just went down by the whole Dewey range, but this can be very helpful in deciding what areas you don't have enough books in and what areas are high circulators. So that's really, really handy. Okay, so to see the number of items you have, I'm actually going to check mark pub year again, because all of the items have a pub year, but instead of having them appear in the row label, I'm actually going to move them to values, and I want it to be a count, because the count of pub year is just the count of the number of items. And again, you would click on value field settings. If it went to sum, you would change it to count, and you can change the custom name, because you don't really want it to be called count of pub year, because count of pub year is not really relevant to what we're doing. We're just going to call it number of items. And so then we have a really nice report. We can see it broken down by the Dewey numbers. We can see it broken down by the pub years. And then we also have within each pub year range the number of circs and the number of items. And if you wanted to switch it around, you can just move items up and then circs down. So you just drag to organize how you want to see it in your table. So let's say we were really happy with this pivot table, but we want to keep playing around. If we want just paste or just to have a copy of this particular table, what we can do is we would just click inside of the table and again hit Control A, and you would just open up a new worksheet, and then you would choose Paste. Oops. Forgot to hit Control C afterwards. So Control A, Control C to copy, and then Control V. And then it turned it into a pivot table. If we just want it to be the values, you just choose the paste special where it's just values. So now it's no longer a pivot table. You have the values, and so you can just call it what it is, and then you can go back to the original pivot table and make changes. So if you wanted to see, instead of item lifetime circ count, item previous year circ count, you could do the exact same thing. And now you have it for previous year circ count, or you could do it for year to date. So you can definitely play around with what's going to appear in your rows, in your columns, and your values. So that's the first pivot table that we're creating. Any questions before we move on to the next type of pivot table? And one thing to note is lynda.com, one of our e-resources, has a great course on pivot tables, and you can also choose the pivot table course based on which type of which version of Excel you have. So I definitely recommend, if you think you'll be using this more often, to watch the course, because you can find out even more things that you can do with pivot tables. Okay, so let's make our next report, and again it's item list reports, and this report is just called item list report, and then in brackets it says useful with pivot tables in Excel. So this is literally just all of your items listed. Okay, so what we're going to do is choose material type, and you can just go through this list and see what type of information you think you would want in the pivot table. And what's nice is you can add extra things here and not check mark them off in the pivot table under the field list, and you still have it there. So if you took too many things and you don't use it, you don't use it. It doesn't really matter. Item circ status, item creation date, item last circ status change date, item lifetime circ count, and item price. Okay, so we just have to add some filters. I'm just going to choose a branch. Okay, and we're looking at the entire collection, but we only want to see items that have not been deleted. So we're going to check mark final, and then we're going to check mark circ status and highlight them all. So we're going to click on the top one, scroll to the bottom, hold down Shift, and click on the bottom one. And then we'll hit submit. And so when you see this report, it doesn't seem very useful to you, and it's almost 15,000 items, and it could be bigger depending on the size of your library. But the pivot table is going to extrapolate the data that we actually want to make this relevant. So we're going to hit download report and download. And just hit yes. So now we have all of this data. I'm just going to stretch these out so that we can actually see the times. So one thing we're going to do before we actually move this into a pivot table is the creation date and status date is very specific. It gives you even down, the breakdown of the specific time the last checkout happened, and it's the specific day for the creation date. And in this case, we are just interested, I'll do it just for the creation date, but you can do it for the status date as well when you're playing around. But in this case, we're just interested in the month and the year of the creation date. So we want to separate the data out so we just have the month and year. So to do that, I'm just gonna cut these, so highlight them and hit Control X and move them down and hit Control V, because we're going to separate all of these day, month, year, time, and AM and PM into their own separate columns. So to do that, we're going to click on Data, and we're going to click on the whole column, and we're going to click on Text to Column. And we want to make sure we're choosing Delimited. Hit Next. And then we want to have space, because there's a space between the year and the time. And we want Other and a slash hit, so that way it knows to break it up. And it's giving you a preview, so it has it broken up by day, month, year, hour, and AM and PM. So that looks good. So then we're going to hit Next. And then we're going to say where we want it to start, the destination. So I'm going to say I want it on D1 so that we still have this field for now. And then I'm going to hit Finish. So now it's separated the creation date the way we wanted. And we're just going to delete the information we don't want. So we don't want the day of the month. We don't want the hour. And we don't want AM or PM. And again, if you have never done this before, this video is being recorded, so you can watch this at a later time and write down all of the instructions on how to do this. And then we just have to give it a name. So creation month and creation year. Okay. And then we don't need creation date anymore. And this is an easier way instead of doing groupings. You could do groupings, it just would take longer. This is a much faster way to group items together because it's just looking at month or year. And then we're just going to get rid of these fields now because we don't need them. Okay, so that looks good. So again, hit Control A to highlight all of the data. We're going to go to Insert and choose Pivot Table. And again, we're happy with the selected range because we hit Control A, and we're going to hit New Worksheet. So now we see the new fields. So they were different from the last field because these are the fields or columns we chose in Excel. So we're gonna, I'm gonna make a few different pivot tables to show you how fast, once you're more comfortable with it, you can get so much data out of a pivot table. So the first thing we're going to do is, let's say you wanted to know how many items you have broken down by material type and item creation year. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose material type for row so we can see all of the different materials. And then we're going to choose creation date. We just want the year, and we just want it went to values. We're just going to move it to the columns so we can see the different years that we created the items. And then now we just have to choose what we want to see in the values, and what we want to see is the item status description, because all items have a circ status. So we're just going to choose item status description values, and we just want it to be a count because that's going to show us how many items we have. It's just giving the numbers broken down by material type and creation year. So you can kind of see where you're spending your money. Obviously, like with DVDs and Blu-rays, they will be higher in more modern years. So that's the first report that we created. And again, all of this is recorded, so if you want to remember how to make this report, you can watch the video later, or you can just write down what I put in the column, row, and value, because it's not too much, it's not too complicated. Okay, so now let's say we wanted to know the value of our collection based on format and circ status. So in this case, we would still leave material type in row, but we want to actually, I'm just going to uncheck creation year. We actually want the item status description in the column. So now we can see the different circ statuses. And we actually want it broken down by the price. So we're going to check mark price and move price over to values. It went to count though, so this is one of the times where it's really important to pay attention because it's not giving us the information we want. So if I just click on it and choose value field settings, we actually want it to be a sum. And it's good to change the number in number format to currency. That way it looks right. And then we're going to hit OK. So now it has it broken down by material type and circ status, and it lets you know how much money or how many items you have, like what they're worth in each kind of area. And so this can be really handy to play with the columns. You might only want to see, for example, the items you no longer have. So claim never had, claim returned, lost, missing, and maybe you want mending in this case. And so then you can see the values of items that you don't really have access to anymore. So again, this can be a really handy report, and it's really nice that you can filter the columns to kind of show the information you're looking for. So I'm just going to select all again. Okay, so other things you can do, like a simple one, is that we can leave the material type on row, and we can just going to uncheck price and uncheck item status description. And let's say we just want to look at the circ count. And we can just leave it as sum of item lifetime circ count. So that way, this is a simple report. We're seeing the material type and the lifetime circ counts based on the material type. Okay, and the last one we're going to build, we're going to leave material type in row, and in column, I'm just going to uncheck item lifetime circ count, we're going to put the price in the column. So this is another one that you'll want to group together. So let's say you kind of want to know how many items you have based on the different prices and based on the material type. So again, this one could take a little bit longer because there's a lot of different prices, but we're just going to group. So we'll start from 0. We'll go to $4.99 and hit group. And then we can do 0 to $4.99. And then we would hit minus so we don't see all those specific items. And then you would just continue doing this. And I'll just do it for a few more just so you can see what it would look like. We'll do 5 to $9.99. And then just holding down Shift and hitting group selection. And I'll do one more. We'll do 10 to $14.99. But you would just continue this for all of them. And I'm just going to hide the other ones because I just want to kind of show you what it would look like clean. And then you would choose the count of item status descriptions under values. And so it's just going to show you, again, I'm choosing count of item status description because all items have a status description. So it's basically just giving me a count of the items. And it's letting me know how many items I have in each material type based on a price range. So you kind of know what you're spending, what the average you're spending for different types of material. So really you can play around. If you wanted to break it down, like you just wanted to look at 2015, for example, you can choose the creation year only of 2015 and then choose the month and just look at 2015 each month, and you could run that same report. So you have endless possibilities with pivot tables. When you're in SimplyReports, you basically kind of decide what you think you'd want to manipulate the data with, like which fields or which columns in SimplyReports, and then you can just drag to different rows, columns, and values, and it will just give you different data that you're looking for. So definitely play around. I definitely recommend after this webinar making one of the reports, following the depository to build the report, and then making a pivot table in Excel and seeing kind of all of the data that you can gather with pivot tables. It's a fantastic tool, very useful, gives you a lot of information about your collection, and you could do the same with patrons as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me now, or you can phone or email me after the webinar if you want to try building a specific type of pivot table or SimplyReport report. But thank you again for attending the webinar, and if you could please fill out the evaluation when you close out of it. Thank you so much.